The plan was, we're not going to try to invest to make money in 3 months or 6 months. Look, there's lots of people who do that and are very good at it. People who flip homes and wholesale things and are very transaction based. We said, we're going to make a bet on where this will be in 20 years. And so basically everything we buy, we actually aim to hold for 20 years. Now, we don't hold everything. Sometimes we'll buy something and it ends up not being the right asset for us. So we probably sold 5% of the things we bought. But we go at this thing, and when you go at it with a 20-year vision, it's a totally different thing, because now you're not scared of, in 6 months, what if the economy starts to turn down?
Here's the one. I have a dream. With great power comes great responsibility. I can do this all day.
This is it. Don't get scared now.
They may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom! Cinderella's story, out of nowhere. It's in the hole! That the only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
Avery, welcome back to Capital Hacking. We are coming in hot today, guys. We got Chad Gallagher, owns a company called Home 365. They actually manage a bunch of my units.
You know, we're going to talk about business. We're going to analyze where we're at in the economy for acquisition of real estate. So many of us are questioning, okay, with rates this high, how do you evaluate this? We're going to open up all of our minds to an expression I learned, and we actually talk about it. It's called buying the real estate versus renting the rate. Wait till you hear. It's going to come up in the second half of the show. You're going to love it. Oh, by the way, I know John and I loved the buy now. Don't worry about a 2-year or even a 6-month horizon. Think of these as assets that you're going to hold for 5 to 10 years, because that's where the real wealth is made in real estate. But he translates that into investing in your business and your career.
I love it because Chad also talks about how he's done 4 pivots in his life, where he went from being a tech guy to being a real estate investor to then owning a property management company, scaling that, partnering up with another one, then creating technology so he can get massive funding. And now he's on his 4th leg with that business.
Of course, the guy is always going to teach us about building community and analyzing deals and valuations. I think you're going to love this because there's a lot about, and we always talk about this too, the comparison of real estate acquisition and company acquisition. Always something we want you guys to be thinking about, and how to create value there too. You're going to love this episode.
Let's go.
It is absolutely great to have you here, Chad, and my buddy John.
What's up, everybody?
Chad, for those of us who have not met you yet, though you've been on the show at least once, maybe twice.
Once.
Oh, see, you're keeping track. I see that. Okay. 250 shows, one Chad Gallagher. That is a disappointment on my part. So, Chad, for those of us, thousands and thousands of listeners who haven't met you yet, can you share a little more about your background and journey?
Yeah, sure. I, took some couple different turns along the way that we'll probably speak to, but now I'm the chief growth officer and investment officer for a company called Home 365. We're one of the largest property management companies in the country. And I also invest pretty heavily in real estate across 3 or 4 different states, across a wide variety of types of real estate. But how I got here is interesting.
The whole journey.
And not straightforward.
It's not straightforward, but before we get into the chronology of your story, which is awesome, and John and I know some of it, and we want to dig into it a little bit. The last time you added value to this community wasn't a podcast. Remember, you were the keynote for the Accountable Equity Learn and Grow. You did a phenomenal job. I got great feedback on that.
That's great.
You were passionate, and I still have videos of it, talking to investors, and maybe we start this off a little bit, about what the difference is about investing in real estate and the tax strategies compared to anything else you've been involved in. You did a great talk about that.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's interesting. I don't have an accounting background by nature, and I used to find accounting to be pretty boring. But I think the older I've gotten, the more I've realized that, I actually think it's really important for people to actually understand some of these key accounting and tax rules. A lot of people will say, get a great accountant. I actually don't agree with that. I mean, yes, I think you want an accountant, but your accountant should not be this person who you just once a year give a bunch of stuff to. I think that people who really do this right in terms of building wealth, their accountant is one resource. But I mean, I actually study, when new tax law comes out, I actually read the tax law
Whoa, whoa, whoa,
and
whoa, whoa.
really,
It's thousands of pages. How do you do that? Do you get a Reader's Digest version, or how do you do that?
yeah, yeah. I mean, it's actually not you'd be surprised. Some of these updates, parts of the law don't matter, right? So if there's a change in how agriculture farming is being handled, I ignore that. But the parts that are really key to what we're doing, which is stuff around real estate or depreciation or those things, we'll actually read it. And the problem is a site like CNN is going to do a recap of it, and their recap is not, frankly, meant for these listeners on this podcast. It's meant for the person who, nothing against this, but it's meant for the person who's a school teacher, who has a basic job, and they're trying to understand, what are these politicians doing with the tax policy? And so, by getting more granular, you can actually understand how it applies to you. Then we take that and actually have a conversation with our accountant saying, hey, here's what I'm reading and I'm understanding. Am I thinking about this right? And then they'll come back to us. And it's a dialogue. We talk to our accountant about once every 2 months right now. And so it's not just at the end of the year. It's about all sorts of stuff. It impacts our business, how we plan our business, how we plan capital investments in the business. And for sure, it impacts investing. And, we've made investments in the last year where we saved more in taxes on the investment than what we made as a down deposit on the investment. So
Chad, real quick, I just want to stop for the listeners because what you just ran over is so important that meeting with your accountant isn't just a once a year, twice a year type of thing. I know for my wife and I and my other partners, we do speak to our accountant quite frequently, and we're talking about the different deals that we're involved in. And guys who are listening that own real estate and are investors, you need to do that because you may get hit with a lot of taxes that you could have been very creative with over the year if you're not speaking to your accountant. And if your accountant doesn't understand businessmen, entrepreneurs, real estate investing, you need to find one that does. But let me rewind a little bit. So can you tell us how you made the jump to being in Home 365, which is one of the largest property management groups in the country? How did you get to that part? Like, give us some of the journey.
yeah, sure. So I got an engineering degree. So that's kind of where I started. So I was always really interested in tech, but I was not so much interested in technology from the sense of writing code, although I have written some code in my life, but I was more interested in taking tech and applying it into businesses. And so I spent about 10 years in digital advertising, working for a company called advertising.com. And what I learned to really see, the marketing industry was really getting disrupted in a huge way. It had never been touched by tech, then it was. And what I learned was if you can make a bet on tech early on, you don't actually have to be amazing because everything's coming your way. And so what I actually did was I found myself in mobile advertising, and I was leading our mobile advertising business unit. And, everyone thought I was like, oh man, Chad, you're like growing the business so fast. You're this like incredible entrepreneur growing this thing. It was like, yeah, I guess. What I really did was when I could see that, hey, tech is going to change this. This is where it's going. I don't think you actually have to be amazing because there's just so much coming your way that you kind of catch all that wind behind your sails. And there's so much energy behind it and innovation and investment. And so I did that for a while, started to make some money. The problem was all my money was being taxed at a 45% tax rate. And so my best friend growing up in 2012 actually said to me, we should start investing in real estate. And I thought it was crazy. I really did. I'll never forget when I told my mom, she cried. Because look, I think real estate's scary to a lot of people. A lot of people are scared of failure, frankly. And so she tried to talk me out of it. But our plan then is actually the same plan we use today in our investing. And so that was kind of the next pivot, was to start investing in real estate. And the plan was, we're not going to try to invest to make money in 3 months or 6 months. Look, there's lots of people who do that and are very good at it. People who flip homes and wholesale things and are very transaction based. We said, we're going to make a bet on where this will be in 20 years. And so basically everything we buy, we actually aim to hold for 20 years. Now, we don't hold everything. Sometimes we'll buy something and it ends up not being the right asset for us. So we probably sold 5% of the things we bought. But we go at this thing, and when you go at it with a 20-year vision, it's a totally different thing, because now you're not scared of, in 6 months, what if the economy starts to turn down? No, I mean, look, over 20 years, there's going to be ups and downs in the economy. There's going to be various things that come at you. And so that has really led us to have some stability to our investments, and a strategy that I think has really worked. And so we started to acquire properties then. 10 years later, we now have a really awesome portfolio of everything from single family homes to 15-unit buildings to even a couple of short-term rentals now across 4 different states. And about a year into that, 2 years into it, was kind of the third pivot, which was realizing that we wanted to hire a property management company. And what I saw in property management was exactly what I saw in advertising, which was not yet impacted by tech and a very scattered universe. And so we decided to start a property management company. And I eventually left digital advertising to kind of jump into that. And that kind of like the third phase. And we grew that to a point where we were managing about 5,000 properties. And when COVID hit, my business partner and I, we shut our offices down for COVID, like many did. We had to. We didn't have a choice. And this is kind of funny, actually. So my business partner and I, we actually we took my mom's office. So at my mom's house, she has this side kind of office building. And him and I used that as our personal office for a month. It was just my business partner and I, Nate. And Nate and I sat there. And Nate's job was to figure out how the company had to evolve in basically 30 days with all the impacts of COVID. People aren't in offices, eviction filings were getting completely changed, various money hitting the system from COVID relief, et cetera. So that was his job, and to make sure people don't freak out. And my job, because I normally was out kind of growing the company and also meeting with investors, but no one really wanted to talk about anything but COVID. So I decided to take a step back and figure out what's the next phase of our company. And when we did that, we decided we wanted to actually own the technology we were using. So up till now, we've been licensing everything. And so went on a couple-month journey to figure out how could we actually own the tech. Look, we think about technology as an investment, just like actually a lot of other people invest in other things. Technology is a big investment. It opens up different things. And so when you actually own the tech, you now can get access to funding vehicles that are interested in you that aren't interested when you don't own the technology. And so we started to talk to everyone from VCs to private equity to the largest real estate companies you've heard of, Zillow and all these other guys, to see what could we do. Had a lot of fascinating conversations because everyone was holed up in their personal office at home. So everybody actually wanted to talk. And what we ended up doing was forming a partnership with a company called Home 365, who had basically spent 5 years building out this end-to-end technology platform. They were managing about 1,000 units, and they were looking for a team who could take this across the country and eventually across the world. And so we essentially merged the companies together, sort of a sale, sort of a merger. The teams kind of combined forces. We flipped some of our equity into the combined company. And, it took about 6 months to negotiate. It was a very complicated deal, and that kind of is what kicked off, the kind of this like fourth leg of my journey, which is now in this, it's still a property management company, but now it's property management company that owns technology, that has 150 people. We've raised now $45 million in funding, and it's super exciting. And, it's one of the best parts of this whole journey is being inside a real estate company that's both a service and tech company, but also I'm still an investor in real estate. And so I get to talk to, folks like yourselves, but all over the country who are real estate investors. And that helps not just the company, but also my own personal investing, as I'm basically getting, access to some of the brightest brains out there that want us to improve, because a lot of them are using us or want to use us as a company. But then I get to also kind of impact my own investing along the way.
So something I'm hearing here a lot, Chad, is the word pivot and how you went through different phases. And phase one was you were involved in technology. That was your first phase. Then you pivoted into real estate, long-term and short-term. Short-term rentals, SRTs. And then with the 20-year vision, I love that. Not looking for the get-rich-quick scheme, but you're looking for the get-rich in the long-term scheme, that vision.
Yep.
Then you pivoted into property management, which is something I completely stay away from. And actually, your company manages a lot of my properties. And then you realized to get more funding was to be in technology and to own the technology for the property management company. So then you merged Slate House with Home 365, right?
Exactly.
Yep. And then now, how many properties are you guys managing across the country? Because you were 5,000. You said Home 365 had 1,000.
Yep.
Now I know there's a lot more than that. How many are you guys managing?
Yes, we're at like 7,500. What we did was when we merged the companies together, the first year, it was a lot of, you know, just a lot of process and integration work, which, by the way, for someone like myself and maybe for people on the phone or on the podcast, integrating is like my worst nightmare. I'm like a caged tiger, right? And so we did that for about a year of just kind of, getting everything up on new processes and now have everything realigned and are growing the company. It's super exciting. It's interesting as you kind of talk through this, when I think about these pivots we've made, each one, it's still with like a 5 to 10 year horizon in mind. And I think sometimes where people get in trouble is, they get, we've had employees come here to our company and they're like 2 months in and they're like, Chad, I think I'm going to quit the company. I'm like, what? And they're like, I don't like it. I'm not good at this. I'm like, you're 2 months in. You don't even know where the water cooler is yet, and I think, when you go at something with, like in advertising, I was in there for 10 years. When you go at something with that kind of a vision, like I'm going to be in this for 5 to 10 years, man, like that totally changes things. Like, because then your brain starts going to, how am I going to figure this out? You're less afraid of immediate failure because look, the first couple months are going to be rough. If I told you you're going to do something for 5 years, you would never expect the first 3 months to be this incredible wild success where you climbed Mount Everest. No, if the goal is to climb Mount Everest in 5 years, you're not going to try to climb it in 3 months. You're going to realize that you're just kind of building up along the way. And so I think that's like really important is I see that, the folks that we deal with who are really successful seem to have that same approach. It's like they're really committed. It's kind of like the Michael Phelps thing where he's like, you need a certain number of hours really committed to something. There's a few different people who have kind of had this concept along the way, but it's like, like when you really commit to something to me, it's 5 years. I think in 5 years, you can be the best at anything. And I think, there's times when you've made a completely horrible decision and you're just, maybe you realize that was bad. But I think when you really think about it that way, you're going to figure it out along the way. And that's how we've kind of approached our things.
Chad, it's such a different interview from 200 episodes ago when you and I got together. So first of all, absolute honor for you to share those. I call them the 4 epochs so far of Chad. We forgot to talk about your lovely wife, Ashley. Now you have the 2 children, right?
Yeah.
And I love that lady. She's a powerhouse.
But look, I say this all the time. When I spoke to the Accountable Equity crew, I made this point. Ashley was with me then. Well, she's still with me now. She's here
very
today.
much with Chad. So.
Right. But I think, and you guys both are really good at this. I think some people, how Ashley and I approach this is like we're a team. And it sounds so super cliche, but it's true. And, so if I'm out, like, I might have to travel to Israel for a week. And when I'm doing that, she's taking care of the kids at home, making sure that whole thing gets nailed down. I don't get this like, I don't know, passive aggressive, like, oh, you're leaving me with the kids and you're off. No, like she realizes like I'm doing something for the family. And in that case, it's, building wealth. And she's doing something else that's really important for the family. And we actually intertie things. So our short-term rental, she actually manages our short-term rental, which is a like luxury high-end rental. $2,500 a night to stay there. But it's a thing. It needs very intense communication with people. She's in charge of marketing of it. So I guess what I'm saying is I think that one thing that's helped our family and our relationship is, and I know you guys are really great at this too, is actually like intertwining things and making things, she'll come to our speeches, she'll come to our company events. And now she's managing some of our assets. So it really feels like we're kind of in this together. And I think that's great.
Chad, I'm gonna have John make a comment about this in a minute because this is one of his passions. But Ashley, I hope you're listening here. I was thinking about you. We got to get you on the podcast because you're a dynamo, your branding strategies, your intelligence, your PhD now. I think you're a PhD, correct? Did she get her
Yeah,
PhD done?
PhD, and she's got like 125,000 people who follow her on Instagram.
I know. She's a legit superstar.
Healthy living with Ash.
Okay,
we're
gonna
learn about. Yeah.
Will
Put that
you
in the
get
show
her on the
notes.
show? We'll just do it, Ashley Gallagher show.
Yeah, she'd be great.
Okay, we're not going to let you on that one. But to go back a second, I'll let you come in here in a minute, John. We're gonna break this down in a minute. But Ashley and you, I think what you guys have always shown me is I think you're very much in love. At some point, she saw your entrepreneurial nature. There is a balance. There's a different personality type between the two of you. And the last thing I'll say, and I want John to add to the family dimension. I saw you 200 episodes ago. And I was I admired you a lot because back then you were building Slade House from a couple hundred contracts to thousands, and you were doing it within a year. And I saw the unleashed tiger, as you mentioned a minute ago, Chad Gallagher. And I saw what you were trying to do. And what I always complimented you back then was you were willing to take a few risks, make a mistake here and there, but you were going to fight through it. And you are the perennial hustle. You're the hustle guy. Some people disagree with your strategy of hustle. Like I've seen you work 20-hour days. I've seen you drive all day to get to something, go all day and then go all the way home. I've seen you spend the night at family's house so that you don't have to drive back 3 hours to your wife's house. You are the absolute definition of the original Charlie Hustle. So some people don't like that. I actually admire that in you, brother. And I've seen you make mistakes and you always own up to it. So
yeah, I think that's right. Josh, I think, something I tell our teams actually a lot is I say, if the goal in life is to make baskets, let's use a basketball analogy, right? There's two ways to get better. You can either improve your shooting percentage or you could take more shots, right? And so, for me, I always thought, yes, of course I want to improve my percentage. I always want to learn. I want to innovate. I want to get better. But I can control how many shots I take. I mean, bar none, from day one, right out of college, I knew I could control that. And so I think, to not take a lot of shots, and you call it hustle, whatever, work hard, give it all you've got. To me, that's just you're just sacrificing a gift you have. That's an old Prefontaine quote. To give anything less than your best is to sacrifice the gift. And I think, the only thing I think about this, and actually I was telling you about this earlier this morning when we were talking. It's fascinating, isn't it? People that have work ethic and grit, they're kind of given the benefit of the doubt more. Right? It's like, I don't know, if you're at a restaurant and the waitress screws up, but you see her like really trying and she's running around and maybe she's not the most organized person, but you see that like effort is there. It's like a lot harder to get pissed off at that person. As opposed to the person who's just like outside smoking a cigarette, doesn't care, makes the same mistake, but it just feels worse, doesn't it? So I think that people who work hard, they do get the benefit of the doubt as I think they should. I think they learn actually a lot faster because they're in more conversations, and then they attract people who are high energy. I was telling our team this. Think about this. This is an interesting little analogy about how high energy impacts teams. I was comparing, when you go into an Apple store, most people here at some point been in an Apple store. What does it feel like? It feels like high energy, like successful people in a high, I don't know why, right? Never think about it. It feels that way. Then Matt can contrast that to going into Boscov's. Maybe some people don't know what that is, right? It's like going into a funeral parlor. It's an old retailer, right? But look, they both do the same thing. They both sell goods. They both employ people who sell things. They both sell things that are both cheap. You can buy, headphones at an Apple thing. You can also buy a new computer at Boscov's, a retailer. You can buy furniture and you can also buy socks. And that's so interesting. And that was obviously Steve Jobs kind of created that vision of that high energy thing. So I think that's what we try to do, as a company, is we try to build out that high energy nature. And I find that to be really intoxicating in a good way for our employees, for our team. And when we're struggling as a company, it's like I can feel it. Like I walk in, I can feel like, and I think one actually goes after the other, right? It's like things aren't going great and the energy gets lower. So then things get worse. And the way to get out of it is actually usually to shift the energy in the right direction. And then results usually, I think, follow.
Chad, I wrote this quote down, and one of the things that I love, and Josh, thank you again for asking me to co-host, is that I get to learn when we're doing this. And the quote that you just gave by Prefontaine says, to give anything less than the best is sacrificing the gift. And then you went on and talked about things that you can control, because in life, a lot of things we can't control, but things that are within our control and we can work hard on and do the reps like Kobe Bryant talks about and put in that work and hone our skills and be the best so that we're not sacrificing the gift. Talk about a mindset, if you will, for a little bit. What gave you that type of mindset?
Yeah. I was lucky. It's interesting. My parents, they still don't understand what I do. They sure didn't teach me income statements. They sure didn't teach me engineering, but they sure did teach hard work at a very young age. And, my dad was actually grew up in a household where no one went to college. He was the first one to ever go to college of any of his brothers and sisters, and paid his way through college, actually partially through a scholarship, through running. He wasn't the most talented runner, but no one was going to outwork him. And, then leveraged that into actually creating, he was a teacher, but on the side had a grass mowing business that he kind of got off the ground. Eventually was a running coach. And I think just at a very early age, kind of instilled in me this concept of you control what you can control. And, you can't control the God-given ability you have to be a runner in the case of being a runner or whatever it is, right? There's certain things you control, certain things you can't. But the things you can control is effort. And man, if you can give everything you've got, that usually works out in your favor in the long term. And that's what he's always, when he's a running coach, he's trying to teach that. And those lessons, what people don't realize is, look, whether you come in third place or fourth place in the 800-meter run, that's not what defines success. But those lessons you learn actually sometimes do drive long-term success.
Back to John's question about mindset, though, I think one thing maybe you don't see about yourself that I saw early on, and I have to admit, when I first met you, you had a funny expression for when you first met me. And when I first met you, I also read you in a very confusing way. I'm like, the dude's 115% energy at all times. His mind's moving a mile a minute. And I'm like, this guy's actually going to make things happen, but I don't know if I don't know if this is going to work. Like, this guy's hard to keep up with. And then I started seeing you deploy every idea you were talking about at that time. And I'm going to share what those were. And you're going to hopefully tell us how we can do some of those cool ideas. But one thing about you, though, is you could see the code. And this is just a concept that I don't know, every once in a while we talk about on the show. There's a code. It's like in The Matrix, when Keanu at the end of the movie can see zeros and ones and X's. I don't know what all the letters were. And all of a sudden, that's why he's dodging the bullets, because it's like, oh, the code's just moving. But you always see that. Like, you can see, wait a second. Like, for example, I'll give you one example. Deal prospecting. At some point, you learned how to deal prospect and buy a building. You had a whole strategy. I'm sure we can talk about that. We might not be able to get into all that today because we haven't even gotten to some of the topic. But at the time, you started transposing the idea of how to prospect a deal into how to buy a company. And it was before a lot of us were even on podcasts talking about, let's buy companies instead of build a company. You just were like, wait a second. Grandpa Joe owns a management company in Baltimore or wherever you were buying. And Grandpa Joe's tired as hell and doesn't want the management company and doesn't even care about it. So you just bought it from Grandpa Joe. And it was not Grandpa Joe. But it was like that. People were tired. And you said, why don't I just buy your company? And you did that 3 times, didn't you? Like multiple times?
Yeah, we've now bought 12 companies.
It's like buying a tired old fixer-upper house and nobody wants to fix up. He just said, I'll just buy your company. And you did that multiple times.
I mean, if you think about it, right, I think that it's interesting. Buying an old house from someone, that seems a little more normal. Buying a business seems a little more complicated. It's actually the same thing. And what I learned is actually it really comes down to really understanding what is going on for the person who owns the asset. Number one. And then number 2 is having a vision for where that asset can go long term. And so to me, it's that simple. Number 1, get to know the asset and the person who controls it in a really deep way. So when we go to, and we do acquire companies, I don't call them acquiring, I call them doing partnerships. It's kind of like weird things. Because I want the person to feel like they're a part of where this thing's going. I want them to be excited about the future vision of the company they started. By the way, it's no different than how you buy wedding venues, right? You want the person to be excited about the future state of where this thing can go. So we take that really seriously. But I want to really understand what's going on here. And like, what are they looking for? I want to understand I asked them like about their tax implications of this. I mean, I go like real deep because then I think like, okay, how can I structure this in a way that really most benefits them and that, and obviously us too, but I think about that a lot. So our deals are very creative. They're not cookie cutter. Sometimes people don't like that, but we add all sorts of weird things into them that are really important actually for benefiting both sides. Everything from how long the payout is to when it is to what happens to the employees. A lot of times the employees are really important to them. So we talk about that. And then we talk about the future state. Where are we going? Because this thing they started, imagine you start anything, whatever you start in life. By the way, even your own house you live in, right? You sell it, you kind of want to know it's going to be well taken care of, don't you? It's a weird thing, right? But it's like, I don't know, you spent 25 years living in the house. If someone comes in and just knocks it down, it's kind of effed up, right? It's like, hey, I like that house. Now, if you want to make the house nicer, that sounds pretty cool. Yeah, I can get behind that. What's your vision here? So that's what we think about a lot with how we buy anything. It's actually the exact same strategy. There's no difference. You couldn't even tell if I was negotiating to buy a company or negotiating to buy a property. It would sound the exact same. You'd think it was the same conversation because you do it the same way. What's going on in their life? How really understand? I take hours to understand what's going on, and then ultimately put together a plan with them of a partnership, and then really help them understand where this thing can go long term for all the people involved. And it's worked out pretty well.
Love it. That's amazing. So you were talking about you bought 12 businesses. We're at 7,800 units that you're managing. What's next for you?
Yeah, good question. So, a couple of things. One is and we're actually we're really intentional about this. And it's weird. I keep telling these 5-year plans, but this is how we do this. So on the Home 365 property management side, we feel like we're about 2 years into a 5 to 10 year journey in that company. It's actually interesting. One of my friends texted me, one of our clients, but I'm probably better friends than being a client. And he said, hey, isn't it time for you to move on to your next thing? And I said, move on to the next thing. We're just getting started here. We're in year 2 of what's a long mission here. So that's the first thing is we're in year 2, approaching year 3 now of the Home 365 vision and really growing that out. I think that's super exciting. It's making so on that front, it's making investing in real estate passive and predictable for investors. So, we talk about tech. We haven't talked too much about when you're a real estate investor, everyone says passive income. Passive income is what you want. Bullcrap. The average real estate investment is not passive. Now, if you're investing in a syndication like you run, Josh, that is passive. But I mean, if you actually take control of the deed, whether you hire a management company or not, and you guys know this full well, you guys literally live this world, it's not passive today. And I would argue it's not entirely predictable. And so we're trying to make it passive and predictable through a program called One Rate, where basically we take on the risk as a management company of vacancy and repairs of the property. So you pay a higher fee, but then it's a much more predictable income stream. It looks much more like a bond than it does your typical real estate cash flow, which is much more up and down. Backed by lots of assets on the plan, we're able to kind of mitigate our risk across all these different properties. So we're getting great feedback on that product. Super excited, super pumped is how I describe these things to kind of grow that out. So we'll grow that out over time and work with
Chad. Hold on, because I want the listeners to understand. Now I have 40 of my 56 units with One Rate.
Wait, there's 16 that we don't work with you on?
Well, they're in the Philadelphia area, so
I'm just kidding. I'm just playing.
But that is an interesting concept. And when Quay was explaining it to me, I thought, wow, okay, so because you're absolutely right. Real estate, even though people think rentals are passive, they are not necessarily passive. And sometimes they'll keep you up at night, many nights, many times. So Chad, you have a product called One Rate that is actually more expensive than a normal management company. But once the rent is paid for 3 months, you guarantee rent forever, even when the property is vacant. And on repairs, it's capped to only $199 or $200, even if something goes.
Yeah, there's a couple different plans. Right, a couple different plans, but furnace goes out, and we'll actually take care of the furnace.
So it gives the investor real peace of mind. So I love that passive and predictability. But let's speak to the predictability part, especially in this economy. Where do you see us going?
Yeah, that's good. That's a good question. So couple of things I'll speak to. First, just to close out on making real estate more predictable. as real estate becomes more predictable, and we're a part of this, but don't see us as being the only part. I mean, there are other things at force here that are making real estate more predictable. As real estate becomes more predictable from a day-to-day cash flow perspective, and I'm not talking about the valuation of the real estate. I'm talking about literally the cash flow. As it becomes more predictable, it actually increases the value of the asset. Because if you think about how asset classes trade, so think about the extreme is the bond, super predictable, low variant. What are your returns? Much lower. As you increase, or as you decrease in predictability, your returns have to increase to handle that higher variance. That's not real estate. That's just investing in general, right? So one of our theories here, and we're seeing it happen, is as real estate becomes more predictable from a day-to-day cash flow, what will happen? The valuation of the real estate will actually increase of those rental assets. And one reason for that, and this gets to one of the things we see is coming, is new entrants into the asset class will appear. So some examples of who those are, there's the big and the small, actually. On the big side is you see now funds getting interested in playing in the single family home real estate space. Why? Because all of a sudden this has become predictable for them. They wanted a predictable asset. Now they can get into one, and they don't need returns of, you guys know, if you're buying a single family home, you're expecting returns of 15 to 20% over a long period of time. That's like what we would usually shoot for, maybe 15 to 17. Depends on, obviously the class. Look, the fund, if they can lock in returns of 12%, they're thrilled. If it's highly predictable, because they're getting their money in a much lower percent. So what that means is they're actually willing to pay more for that same asset if what comes with it is predictability. So theme one is seeing bigger folks going in. Theme two is seeing that doctor who lives maybe in wherever, anywhere in the world, actually. So people in Israel, people in Chile, you wouldn't believe this. We have 100 investors who live in Chile who are clients of ours. It's like a new concept. It's like much harder to invest internationally because you didn't have that predictability. You didn't know. Now people can invest all over the world and get access to the U.S. predictability of real estate, which, by the way, doesn't exist in most countries. So you're seeing people enter into the real estate market, number one. The second theme that undoubtedly has to be talked about, and it was one of the things I really want to cover today, is, look, people are talking about, obviously, interest rates increasing are at the top of everyone's mind. What people aren't talking about is when you go a little bit further back on the interest rate graph, you see that actually over 40 years, we haven't seen once an actual interest rate increase that stayed firm for a couple of years. That leads to a whole bunch of interesting things going on. By the way, it's not good or bad. People say, oh, don't invest in real estate. No, that's not true. You just got to understand what's going on. So what's going on is a couple things. One is people are freaked out. So all of a sudden, everyone's slowed up on buying real estate assets. Whenever people get freaked out about anything in life, they slow down and stop, which is fine. That's just human nature, number one. Number two is everyone is sitting on mortgage loans at 3 to 4%. So when they go to move and all of a sudden they see their new cost of borrowing is going to be 7, they get freaked out and they just stop. So what we're thinking about happening right now is a couple things. One is because everyone's freaked out, there are still assets out there that have to transact for some reason or another. If you think about it, what we're interested in doing is when interest rates were 3 to 4%, we were pushing everyone, lock in interest for as long as possible. But now that interest rates are up at around 7 or 8, we say you don't have to do that. So actually still buy the asset, make sure you're not underwater month to month, but buy the asset realizing that most likely how we see the world is somewhere between 18 to 24 months, we would expect interest rates to come back down somewhere in that future. And if that's the case, and you can actually go out and you can buy an asset today, maybe for the next year, the cash flow is not great. That's okay. Just hang in there for a year or two, realizing that at some point in the next, let's say 5 years, even more distant, you should be able to refinance that asset and really kick up the cash flow with the idea of owning that asset for 20 years. That's like a strategy we're like really, really interested in. And all that comes down to is buying the asset at the right price. We're seeing the market for sure cool. I mean, in some places, prices have already come down, but for sure it's cooling. Things are on the market longer. That means there's things out there to be had. And
Chad,
I think that's
Chad,
a really good step.
I want you to stay on this path we're on, and I want to give an example to some of our listeners here. My wife and I, we did a blanket mortgage about a little over a year ago when the rates were really low, and we had old mortgages at 7% and 8% that we were buying back when the interest rates were high, and we did that blanket loan, and it ended up saving us, I think, $38,000 in fees annually. So it's very powerful what you're saying.
That's crazy, man. Yeah, it's great.
I'm going to talk about this one expression I learned last weekend. Have you heard this expression? What you just described is an expression that apparently New Yorkers talk about all the time. It's called buy the real estate and rent the rate. Have you heard of that before?
I haven't. That's the first time. We don't.
So
we don't go to
exactly-
New York that much.
I know a New York real estate investor was just with us the other day at our GoBundance event, and he goes, "Well, Josh, people are remembering the old adage." I said, "What old adage?" "Oh, you buy the real estate and you just rent the rate." And I'm like, "Oh, okay. That's actually a good way to think about it." The other thought I thought you were going to say in your two-part new strategy, which is one, transactions do still occur even with higher rates, and be ready for them. Number two, picture the rate as something you're going to hold on to for just 24 months.
Exactly.
Yeah. But there's a third strategy I thought you were going to say, Mr. Creative Financing, which is sellers are actually getting more flexible with structure.
Yeah.
And you've always had a nice open mind about structure, deal structure. So if somebody wants their price, $380,000 for that house, and you can get seller financing from them or a holdback or something, they very well might take it now.
Yeah, that's true. And by the way, that's not just buying real estate; it's also buying businesses. We actually buy businesses, Creative, too. We almost never, not almost ever, never ever ever have we bought a business and day one we wrote them a check for what the business was worth. It has not happened one time. Over time, I actually want to overpay for the business. I'll tell them straight up, I can actually pay you more if we're much more creative about how we structure this thing in a win-win way. And by the way, the same thing with buying properties. So, by the way, this is the last piece I wanted to get to is when we think about creative. So part of it is seller holdback. The real creative part is if you can figure out a way to hold the loan, hold the note.
Right.
Because think about that. And this is the thing I'm really talking about with people. And this is maybe this is very, very, very important for people to hear this. So historically, when people move, they sell their house, right? And they buy a new house. When the last downturn hit, a lot of people couldn't sell their house because the real estate prices were real high. And they started to kind of rent things out again. You're going to see a major surge in people renting out their home rather than selling it. And the reason is, it's actually a double reason. So yes, you're going to see home prices come down a little bit, but that's not the big reason. The big reason is what they're sitting on is more valuable than anything else. And that is a 30-year loan at a 2.9% interest rate. And they're not going to want to get rid of that loan. And so one way to keep that loan, and there's a bunch of ways. And I think you're going to see this whole new thing come about, which is people who are trying to buy things like real estate. Are we thinking about how do I keep that in place? So either I buy the property, maybe I try to assume the loan as part of that, which is actually doable in many ways. That's option one. Or option two is the person who is going to sell their house doesn't sell their house and actually says, you know what, I'm just going to rent out this house. When I move, I don't sell my homes. I rent them out. So again, we think about holding an asset, even my own personal house, we think about holding that asset for 20 to 30 years at least.
You're very interesting. We've reached our time, but I want to let John or anybody share one last thought before we leave. But also, can you share how we could reach out to you? And I have to admit, I wish we could have gotten into the topic of you and your community building activities that I was marveling at 2-3 years ago, where you had all those meetups, and I think you called it real estate hacker meetups.
Yeah.
Do you still do any of those? That's just a public service announcement. Do you still do
Yeah,
those?
we still do. You can find out info about them at realestatehackers.com. We run, I think, 10 different meetups.
Amazing.
They're free, by the way. Free monthly meetups held in, I think, 10 different cities and growing. By the way, not just forget about the content. It's a great way to meet a bunch of badasses across the country. So we do that. Best way to reach me. So I'm on Facebook, pretty good at Chad Gallagher. And then my email, I'll just give you that as well. It's chad@home365.co. So I'm pretty good. Usually a day or two behind on email these days, but I am pretty good about that. So yeah, but Facebook and email seem to be the kind of ways I find to communicate with folks.
Awesome.
And, by the way, you guys have a killer show. I just want to say that. I want to be very, very clear.
Big thanks to Josh here.
Now, both of you guys are awesome. You're on my podcast listening. And I think, man, I want to give you guys huge congrats to not just what you guys do as businesses, not just what you do on the podcast, but in all sincerity, also on the people side, you guys are real deal people, which I really appreciate. It's been fun to see you guys grow. And you guys have incredible morals that you can see that touch everything you guys do in the communities you're in. And it means a lot to me. You guys are like mentors of mine. So it's awesome. It's really great.
Very, very kind words, Chad. And thank you so much for coming on, the wisdom that you shared. I loved specifically one thing I'm going to hop on. When you're buying an asset, especially a real estate, look at the 20-year vision, not at what's just happening right now in the current state of the economy. So thank you for that awesome lesson.
Thank you, buddy. We will talk to you again later. Thanks so much for being on the show again.
Cheers.
You got it. Take care. Bye.
Damn straight. We just got
buddy.
We got to the end of another great show. And everyone listening right now, you're the family and friends. Thanks for staying till the end.
That was so fun. And hey, hit the like, hit subscribe. We're here to serve you guys. That's why we're doing this show. Josh is not paying me. I'm doing this off of my quote unquote sweat equity because we want to make a difference in your life. And then that ripple effect will continue to touch the world.
Hey, amen, brother. Please check us out on capitalhacking.com, all the social media threads. And yes, I know you've probably already sent this episode to one of your best friends. Thank you. We love you. Just go right into your iPhone, hit the plus symbol. We'll talk to you later. See you next week.
Share.